She vanished on a night when the moon bled red. Sibella had been careful. She'd shed her name like dead skin, crossed oceans on cargo ships that asked no questions, buried herself in a village so remote that even the wind seemed to forget it existed. For 3 years, she lived among humans who knew nothing of wolves or bonds, or the beast that prowled beneath her ribs, pacing endlessly in its cage. She tended a garden with her bare hands. She baked bread that she sold at the village market. She smiled at neighbors who would never know that the quiet woman with sad eyes had once been promised to the most powerful alpha in their world. She asked for one thing: a quiet life. A life where no one would find her. A life where she could forget the man whose claim had burned itself into her very soul, branding her from the inside out. But Calum Vexaris, Alpha King of the Northern Dominion, did not forget. They said he'd gone mad after she disappeared. They said he'd torn apart safe houses with his bare hands, crossed borders that hadn't been breached in centuries, and left a trail of unanswered questions across 3 continents. They said he didn't sleep, didn't eat, and didn't stop until he found the faintest thread of her scent on a shipping manifest bound for nowhere. When he finally stood before her, in the doorway of her tiny cottage with rain dripping from his shoulders and fury blazing in his pale eyes, Sibella understood the truth she'd been running from all along. You cannot escape a bond you never wanted. You cannot hide from a king who refuses to let go. And when she whispered, "Please, just let me live quietly," his answer was a single word that shattered 3 years of carefully constructed silence. No. Neither of them understood yet that his refusal would save her life, and that her quiet life would become the only thing capable of saving his. The morning Sibella's world ended for the second time began like any other. She woke before dawn, as she always did, when the sky was still bruised purple and the fishermen's boats were just beginning to dot the harbor below. The village of Caldera clung to the cliffs of the Azorian coast like a secret whispered between the sea and the stone. It was the kind of place that didn't appear on most maps, the kind of place where time moved slowly and strangers were rare enough to be memorable, the kind of place where a woman could disappear and never be found. Or so she had believed. Sibella pushed open her bedroom window, breathing in the salt, thick air that always smelled of brine and wild rosemary. Her cottage was small. 2 rooms, whitewashed walls, a wood-burning stove that she'd learned to tend through trial and error. She'd painted the walls herself in shades of cream and pale blue, colors that reminded her of nothing and no one. Outside, her garden sprawled in organized chaos, lavender bushes that attracted fat, lazy bees, rosemary that she dried and sold at the market, tomatoes climbing wooden stakes she'd carved from driftwood, and a fig tree she'd planted her first spring here. The fig tree had finally borne fruit last summer. She'd wept when she'd tasted the first fig, not from joy, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization that she might actually survive this, that she might actually build something that lasted. 3 years. 3 years since she'd fled the Northern Dominion in the middle of the night, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. 3 years since she'd felt her wolf truly alive inside her chest, running free beneath open sky. She didn't shift anymore. Couldn't risk it. A wolf running through the hills of a human village would raise questions she could never answer. So she'd learned to keep the beast dormant, to smother the instincts that clawed at her during full moons, to pretend she was just another lonely woman seeking solitude in a beautiful, forgotten corner of the world. It worked. Most days. Today, she had bread to bake. Sibella moved through her morning routine with the mechanical ease of repetition. Flour measured by feel rather than scale. Water from the well behind the cottage. Salt. Yeast. She kneaded the dough with hands that remembered different work. Hands that had once wielded shadows like weapons, that had once been promised to a man who could command armies with a single word. She didn't think about him. She refused to think about him. The bond had gone quiet within months of her escape. At first, it had been agony, a constant pull in her chest, a compass needle spinning wildly toward magnetic north. She'd felt him searching for her in those early weeks, felt his rage bleeding through the connection like fire through dry grass. She'd woken screaming some nights, certain he was standing over her bed, those winter-pale eyes boring into her soul. But eventually, distance had done what time could not. The bond had quieted, faded to a whisper she could almost ignore, or so she had told herself. The first knock came at 8:30. Sibella froze, her hands still buried in dough. No one knocked on her door. Her neighbors waved from across the lane. The postman left packages by the garden gate. The village women who bought her bread met her at the market square. She'd cultivated her solitude carefully, building walls of polite distance that kept everyone at arm's length. The second knock was harder, more insistent. The knock of someone who was not accustomed to waiting. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the door, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. Through the warped glass of her window, she could see a figure, tall, impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the morning light like something carved from shadow and stone. Her wolf, dormant for 3 years, suddenly lunged against its cage with a violence that stole her breath. No. No, no, no. Sibella's hand trembled as it closed around the door handle. She could run. The back door led to the cliffs. She knew every path down to the hidden beach where the fishing boats never went. She could disappear again, find another village, another continent, another life to build from nothing. But her body wouldn't move. The bond, that treacherous thread she'd thought severed, that connection she'd convinced herself had finally died, roared back to life with the force of a hurricane. It flooded her veins like molten gold, set her nerve endings ablaze, screamed at her to open the door, to run to him, to fall at his feet, and bare her throat like the mate she'd been born to be. She wrenched the door open instead, defiance burning brighter than instinct. And there he was. Calum Vexaris looked nothing like the man she remembered. The king she'd fled had been golden, untouchable, beautiful in the way that distant mountains are beautiful, something to admire from afar, never to approach, never to touch. He'd moved through his palace like winter incarnate, leaving frost in his wake and whispers behind every door. But the man standing on her doorstep was gaunt. Shadows pooled beneath his storm-gray eyes like bruises that had never healed, and his cheekbones cut sharper than she remembered, as if something had been slowly carving him away from the inside. His hair, once gleaming white gold and immaculately kept, hung lank and rain-darkened past his shoulders. His clothes were travel-worn, muddied at the hems, the fine fabric fraying at the cuffs. He looked like a man who had been walking for a very long time. He looked like a man who would not stop until he found what he was searching for. Their eyes met, and the bond exploded between them, a violent, visceral thing that made Sibella gasp and stumble backward. She felt it like a physical blow, like lightning striking the same place twice. 3 years, he said quietly. His voice was rougher than she remembered, hoarser, as if he'd spent those years screaming into the void. 3 years, 17 days, and 9 hours. Sibella's throat closed around words she couldn't speak. You counted. I counted every second. He took a step forward, crossing her threshold uninvited, and she took one back. I counted every heartbeat, every mile, every dead end and false trail and moment I thought I'd finally lost you forever. You should have stopped looking. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I left for a reason, Calum. You left because you were afraid. I left because you were going to destroy me. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or rage, or something too tangled to name. He moved deeper into her kitchen, his presence filling the small space until she could barely breathe. Sibella stumbled backward until her spine hit the edge of her kitchen table. He was so close now, close enough that she could smell him. Pine and winter frost and something darker beneath. Something wrong. His scent had always carried the cold bite of a powerful alpha, but this was different. This was the cold of something dying. "I'm not here to destroy you, Sibella." He said her name like it was a wound he'd been nursing for 3 years. "I'm here to bring you home." "I don't have a home anymore. You made sure of that." His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough that she couldn't pull away. The contact sent lightning arcing through her veins, and she saw him flinch too, felt his pulse hammering against her skin. "You are my mate," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Bonded. Claimed. Mine by every law of our kind." A bond I never accepted. Her wolf howled in protest at her words, but she forced them out anyway. A claim I never wanted. "You think running changed that?" His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "You think hiding among humans, pretending to be something you're not, severed what exists between us?" "I think I asked for a quiet life." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I think I begged you to let me go, and you refused. You always refused. Because you belong to me." His voice dropped to something raw and broken, something she'd never heard from him before. "You have always belonged to me, and I have crossed 3 continents, broken 100 laws, and destroyed what remains of my sanity to say this to your face." He leaned in, and Sibella's breath caught. "You asked for a quiet life," he whispered, his lips barely an inch from her ear. "My answer is no. My answer will always be no. And you will return with me, Sibella, because the bond won't let you go, and neither will I." Sibella wrenched her wrist free and put the kitchen table between them. "Get out of my house." Caleb didn't move. He stood in the center of her tiny kitchen like a wolf who had finally cornered its prey, patient now that the chase was over, utterly certain of the outcome. Rain still dripped from his hair, pooling on the stone floor she'd scrubbed that morning. "I didn't come alone," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "There are guards at every exit from this village. Wolves in the hills. A ship in the harbor. You cannot run again. Watch me." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his winter-pale eyes. "You have no pack, no resources, no allies who would dare defy me. You've spent 3 years suppressing your wolf until she's barely more than a whisper in your blood. How far do you think you'll get before my trackers bring you down?" Sibella's hands curled into fists at her sides. He was right, and they both knew it. She'd sacrificed everything to disappear. Her wolf, her power, her identity. She'd made herself weak on purpose, because weakness was invisible. Weakness was safe. But weakness couldn't save her now. "Why?" The word tore out of her before she could stop it, raw with 3 years of suppressed anguish. "Why won't you just let me go? You could have any mate you wanted. Princesses from a dozen kingdoms have thrown themselves at your feet. Alphas have offered you their daughters wrapped in treaties and dowries. You could rule with someone who actually wants to be by your side." Something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like grief, quickly buried beneath his careful control. "You think I don't know that?" His voice was too quiet. "You think I haven't asked myself the same question every day since you vanished? Every night when I couldn't sleep? Every morning when I woke reaching for someone who wasn't there? Then why are you here?" He was silent for a long moment. Outside, she could hear the distant crash of waves against the cliffs, the cry of gulls wheeling overhead. Normal sounds, safe sounds, a reminder of the life he was about to rip away from her. "Because the bond won't let me stop," he finally said, and she heard something crack in his voice. "Because every day you're gone, I feel it, like a hook buried in my chest, pulling me toward you no matter where you run. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can't function as a king when half my soul is missing. He took a step toward her, and she saw his hands trembling at his sides. The council wanted you dead after Soren died. My uncle Theron was particularly insistent. He called for your execution every day for weeks, but I refused. I protected you even when you ran from me, even when you made me look weak in front of my entire kingdom. His uncle. The mention sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. She'd met Lord Theron once, briefly, a silver-haired man with Caelim's features rendered in crueler lines, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. I didn't kill Soren, she said quietly. I told you that. I told everyone who would listen. I know. She stared at him. You know? I've always known. He closed the distance between them until only the table separated them. The magic that killed my brother wasn't yours. The pattern was wrong. The signature was corrupted. But I couldn't prove it. Not without evidence that someone had gone to great lengths to destroy. Then why was I arrested? Why was I put in chains and dragged through your great hall like a criminal? Pain flashed across his face. Because I needed time. Time to investigate, to find proof, to protect you from a council that was baying for your blood. I thought if I kept you contained, kept you visible, I could control the situation. You thought wrong. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him. I thought wrong, and you ran before I could make it right. Sibella's throat tightened. She'd spent 3 years hating him for what had happened, for the chains on her wrists, for the accusations hurled at her head. But now, looking at the ruin of the man before her, she felt something she hadn't expected. Doubt. Even if I believed you, she said slowly. Even if everything you're saying is true, why should I go back? Your court thinks I'm a murderer. Your council wants me dead. What kind of life would I have in the Northern Dominion? Caelim reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. Heavy paper, stamped with a royal seal she recognized all too well. A contract, he said, witnessed and binding under every law of our kingdom. If you return with me, I swear on my bloodline that you will not be harmed. No trial, no accusations, no council interference. You will be under my personal protection until we discover the truth about Soren's death. And the bond? She forced herself to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd appeared on her doorstep. What about the bond that's apparently killing us both? His expression flickered. You feel it too. Don't pretend you don't. The weakness, the exhaustion, the sense that something is draining out of you slowly, day by day. Sibella's blood went cold. Because she did feel it, had felt it for months now. A fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, a hollowness that food couldn't fill. She'd blamed it on loneliness, on grief, on the strain of suppressing her wolf for so long. But what if it wasn't any of those things? The bond between us was never completed, Caelim said quietly. We never finished the claiming. Without that seal, the connection has been unstable for 3 years, draining both of us to maintain itself across the distance. The healers say I have months, maybe less, before it consumes what's left of me. And me? You're stronger than I am. You've always been stronger. Something like admiration crossed his face. But even you can't fight this forever. If we don't stabilize the bond soon, we'll both die. Separately. Alone. Having wasted our last years running from each other. Sibella stared at the contract in her hands, at the elegant script outlining terms that should have been impossible. A king, binding himself to protect an accused murderer, swearing to shield her from his own court. You have until sunset, he said, moving toward the door. My wolves will remain in position. Don't try to run, Sibella. I don't have the strength to chase you again. Then he was gone, leaving only the scent of winter frost and dying embers behind. By sunset, Sibella had made her choice. Not because she trusted Calum, not because she believed his promises of protection, but because when she'd pressed her hand to her chest an hour ago, she'd felt it. That terrible hollowness he'd described, pulsing in time with her heartbeat like a second dying heart. The bond was killing her. She'd been dying all along, and she hadn't even known. When Calum returned to her cottage with 2 guards flanking him, she was standing in her garden, a single bag over her shoulder. She'd left everything else behind. The bread dough had been given to her neighbor. The fig tree would survive without her. Nothing else mattered anymore. "You're ready," Calum said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not ready." Sibella met his winter-pale eyes without flinching. "But I'm coming anyway." Something flickered across his face. Relief, perhaps, or something more complicated. He nodded once and gestured toward the path leading down to the harbor. The journey to the ship was silent. Villagers peered from their windows as she passed, their faces curious but not concerned. They didn't know what she was. They didn't know that the tall, silver-haired man walking beside her was a king, or that the wolves stationed in the hills could tear through their tiny village in minutes. They only knew that the quiet woman who baked bread and tended her garden was leaving. Sibella didn't look back. The ship was larger than she'd expected. A sleek vessel with black sails and the Vexari's crest emblazoned on its hull. A wolf's head, howling at a crescent moon. She'd worn that crest once, embroidered on gowns she'd never chosen, stamped on documents she'd never signed. She'd thought she'd escaped it forever. As she climbed the gangplank, her wolf stirred for the first time in months, not the desperate lunge she'd felt when Calum first appeared, but something quieter, something that felt almost like recognition. "Home," her wolf whispered. "This is not home," Sibella replied silently. "This is survival. Nothing more." Her cabin was small but private, with a narrow bed and a porthole that looked out over the darkening sea. Calum lingered in the doorway after the guards had withdrawn. "You'll dine with me tonight," he said. "We have much to discuss." "Is that a request or a command?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "A request, though I hope you'll accept it." She studied him in the lamplight. Up close, the signs of his deterioration were even more pronounced. The hollows of his cheeks, the faint tremor in his hands, the way he held himself too carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile. He was dying. She could see it now with terrible clarity. And some treacherous part of her, the part that still remembered the man he'd been before everything had gone wrong, ached at the sight. "Fine," she said, "but I want answers. Real ones." "You'll have them." Dinner was served in the captain's quarters, a room clearly designed for Calum's use, with maps covering the walls and a heavy oak table dominating the center. The food was simple but well prepared. Roasted fish, winter vegetables, bread that reminded her painfully of her own. They ate in silence for several minutes before Sibella spoke. "How did you find me?" Calum set down his fork, his pale eyes meeting hers across the table. "A shipping manifest. You ordered seeds from a supplier in Lisbon, a rare variety of fig that only grows in certain climates." The ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "You always did love figs." 3 years of careful hiding, undone by a fig tree. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "The bond helped," he continued. "Once I was close enough, I could feel you. A thread pulling me northeast, growing stronger with every mile. By the time I reached Portugal, I knew you were somewhere along the coast. The manifest confirmed which village." "And the journal?" "You mentioned a journal." His expression darkened. "Soren kept records. Of everything. I found it the day before I came for you, hidden in a place I should have searched years ago." He paused. He documented meetings, conversations, suspicions. He knew who really killed him, Sibella. And he was coming to warn you the night he died. Her throat tightened. Who? There are those in the Dominion who benefit from the curse remaining intact, Caleb said slowly. From keeping me weak. From ensuring no shadowborn ever gets close enough to... He stopped himself abruptly. Close enough to what? Before he could answer, the cabin door burst open. A guard stumbled inside, his face pale in the lamplight. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's a ship approaching. It bears the crest of House Valdron. Caleb went rigid. Every trace of the weary, vulnerable man vanished, replaced by the cold king she remembered. Valdron? They're requesting permission to board. They say they have information about the Queen. Sibella's blood ran cold. House Valdron, the family of her former betrothed, the man she'd been promised to before Caleb had claimed her, the family that had been among the loudest voices calling for her death after Soren's murder. And now, they were here, in the middle of the ocean, with information about her. How did they know I was on this ship? She asked. They couldn't have. Caleb's voice was ice. Not unless someone in my inner circle told them. A traitor. It would seem so. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something beyond the cold control, a fury so deep it made her wolf instinctively want to submit. Stay in your cabin. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Caleb. He was already moving toward the door, his guards falling into formation around him. But he paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Whatever happens, he said quietly, remember that I made you a promise. No one will harm you. Not while I'm still breathing. Then he was gone. And Sibella was left alone with the terrible certainty that the quiet life she'd fought so hard for was well and truly over, and the real danger hadn't even begun. The messenger from House Valdron was a woman. Sibella watched from the shadows of the upper deck as the small boat approached, defying Caleb's orders with every breath. She needed to see this, needed to know who had found her and why. The woman stood at the prow with an ease that suggested she'd spent years at sea. Even from this distance, Sibella could see the sharp angles of her face, the dark hair cropped short against her skull, the way she moved like a predator surveying new territory. She climbed aboard with fluid grace, flanked immediately by Caleb's guards. She didn't seem intimidated. If anything, she looked amused. Alpha King. Her voice carried across the deck, clear and cutting. How gracious of you to receive me. Gracious is not the word I would use. Caleb stood at the center of the deck, his posture radiating controlled menace. Your family has been a thorn in my side for 3 years, Meridia. Give me one reason I shouldn't throw you overboard. Meridia. Sibella's stomach clenched with recognition. She knew that name. Meridia Valdron, the youngest daughter of House Valdron, rumored to be as cunning as she was beautiful. And, according to whispered court gossip Sibella had overheard before her flight, the woman who had been meant to marry Caleb before the bond with Sibella had disrupted everything. Because I have information you need. Meridia's smile was knife-sharp. Information about your precious shadowborn. Information about who really killed your brother. The deck went silent. Even the wind seemed to still. Caleb didn't move, but Sibella saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. Speak. Not here. Meridia's eyes swept the deck, and for a heart-stopping moment, they seemed to pause on the shadows where Sibella was hiding. This conversation requires privacy, and perhaps the presence of the woman you've been chasing across the world. She's not your concern. On the contrary, Meridia's smile widened. She's everyone's concern, especially now that you've brought her back from the dead. Caleb moved so fast Sibella barely saw it. One moment he was standing 5 feet from Meridia. The next, his hand was wrapped around her throat, lifting her onto her toes. Choose your next words very carefully, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, because they may be your last. Meridia didn't struggle, didn't even flinch. Her dark eyes met Caleb's with unsteadiness that bordered on madness. "I'm not your enemy, Caleb. I never was. But you've made enemies you don't even know about. And if you don't start listening to the people trying to help you, you'll be dead before the next full moon." Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. He released her, stepping back with visible effort. "My quarters," he said. "Now." Within the hour, Sibella was summoned. She found Meridia seated at the oak table, a glass of wine in her hand. The woman looked up at Sibella's arrival, and something shifted in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. "So you're the one," Meridia said, "the shadowborn who brought the great Alpha King to his knees." "I brought no one to their knees." Sibella kept her voice flat. "I simply left. And he's been crawling after you ever since." Meridia's laugh was sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've done to him? To his kingdom? The Northern Dominion has been leaderless in all but name for 3 years. Treaties have collapsed. Alliances have fractured. All because their king couldn't stop obsessing over a woman who didn't want him." "Enough." Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood by the window, his back to them both, staring out at the dark sea. "Tell her what you told me. All of it." Meridia set down her wineglass, her amusement fading into something more serious. "House Valdron has been investigating Soren's death since it happened," she said. "Not because we cared about justice, let's not pretend otherwise, but because we suspected the truth from the beginning. A shadowborn killing an alpha prince in the middle of a heavily guarded palace? It was too convenient. Too perfect. Too much like a story designed to be believed." "What do you mean?" Sibella asked. "Shadow magic leaves distinctive marks. Burns that eat through flesh and bone, consuming from the inside out. The damage is unmistakable to anyone who knows what to look for." Meridia leaned forward. "But the marks on Soren's body were wrong. Too uniform, too controlled. Real shadow burns are chaotic, unpredictable. They reflect the emotional state of the caster. But these were precise, surgical, as if someone had studied exactly how shadow magic should look and replicated it artificially." Sibella's heart hammered. "Someone framed me." "Someone framed you," Meridia confirmed. "Someone who knew exactly what you were and used it against you. Someone with access to magic sophisticated enough to mimic shadowborn abilities while leaving no trace of their own signature." "Who?" Meridia's dark eyes slid to Caleb's rigid back. "That's where it gets complicated." "Tell her," Caleb said without turning. His voice was stripped of all emotion. "The magic used to kill Soren wasn't just mimicry." Meridia's voice dropped. "It was inversion. Shadow magic, yes, but twisted, corrupted. The kind of corruption that only occurs when shadow and ice interact." "Ice?" Sibella's blood went cold. "The Vexari's bloodline carries ice magic, has for centuries. It's what makes them so powerful and so dangerous." Meridia's gaze was steady. "Whoever killed Soren didn't just use shadow magic, they combined it with ice. Which means either you have abilities you've never revealed, or someone with Vexaris blood is responsible." Sibella finished. The silence that followed was suffocating. Caleb finally turned. His face was pale, his jaw set in a hard line. "My brother wasn't killed by an outsider. He was killed by someone in my own bloodline, someone who wanted both of us destroyed." "Why?" Sibella asked. "Why would anyone in your family kill him?" "Because Soren knew something." Meridia rose from her chair, moving toward the door. "Something dangerous enough to die for. Something that threatened everything the killer had built. And if my sources are correct, you were the one he was coming to tell when they killed him." Sibella's heart stopped. "What?" "He was found outside your chambers, wasn't he?" Meridia paused at the threshold. "Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what secret was worth murdering a prince to protect." Then she was gone. The northern dominion rose from the sea like a fortress of ice and stone. Sibella stood at the ship's railing as the coastline emerged from the morning mist. Jagged cliffs crowned with snow, dark forests stretching toward mountains that pierced the clouds. It was beautiful in the way that blades were beautiful, sharp, cold, and designed to wound. She'd forgotten how much she hated it here. "We'll dock within the hour." Calem's voice came from behind her. He'd been avoiding her since the night before, keeping his distance with a formality that felt almost painful after the intimacy of their earlier conversations. "A carriage will take us directly to the palace. And then? And then we discover who killed my brother, and clear your name." Sibella turned to face him. In the pale morning light, he looked worse than she'd ever seen him. His skin was nearly translucent, stretched thin over bones that seemed sharper than they had just days ago. His eyes had dimmed from winter bright to a dull, clouded gray. "You need a healer," she said flatly. "I need answers." He gripped the railing and she saw his knuckles whiten. "Healers can't fix what's wrong with me. Only the bond can do that." "Then why isn't it?" Sibella stepped closer, studying his face. "I'm here. I came back. The bond should be stabilizing." Something flickered in his expression. Guilt, perhaps, or dread. "There's something I haven't told you. About our bloodlines. About why the bond is draining us both." Her wolf paced uneasily inside her chest. 200 years ago," Calem said quietly, "a Vexaris king fell in love with a shadowborn woman. His family disapproved. They had her executed for crimes she didn't commit." He paused. "Her sister, Vesrin Nighthollow, swore revenge." Sibella's breath caught. Vesrin Nighthollow, the most feared shadowborn in recorded history, the woman who had nearly destroyed the Northern Dominion before she was finally defeated. "She cast a curse on our entire bloodline," Calem continued. "Any Vexaris who bonds with a shadowborn will have their life force slowly drained through the incomplete connection. The curse feeds on the bond itself, using it as a channel to consume us both." He met her eyes. "And if that alpha ever confesses love aloud, truly, completely, without reservation, the curse activates fully. Death within hours. That's why you said you could never love me." The realization hit her like a physical blow. "Not because you didn't want to, because you couldn't. Loving me would kill you. That's why I chose a mate I thought I could never truly know." His voice was raw. "I thought if I never saw your face, never truly understood you, I could keep my heart safe. I could have the bond without the love. I could satisfy the laws of succession without triggering the curse. But you couldn't." "No." His hand found hers, his fingers ice cold despite the morning sun. "I fell in love with you anyway, Sibella. Every part of you I could know. Your voice, your scent, your defiance, your strength. I fell in love with you before I ever saw your face, and I've been fighting the curse ever since." Before she could respond, he swayed. It happened so quickly, a slight stumble, his hand gripping the railing for support, his face draining of what little color remained. But then his knees buckled, and she lunged forward, catching him before he could fall. "Calem!" He was heavy in her arms, his body ice cold despite the morning sun. His eyes were open but unfocused, his breathing shallow and ragged. "I'm fine," he managed. "Just need a moment." "You're not fine." Sibella lowered him to the deck, her heart pounding. "Guards! Someone help!" The ship's healer arrived, pressing her palm to Calem's forehead. "His core temperature is dropping rapidly. The bond deterioration is accelerating. We need to get him warm, now." "How?" Sibella demanded. "You're his mate. Your presence stabilizes him. Stay close, as close as possible." Sibella didn't hesitate. She stretched out beside him on the cold deck, pressing her body against his, wrapping her arms around him as if she could hold the cold at bay through sheer will. His skin was like ice against hers. She could feel the deathly chill spreading through his veins, could feel the unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the morning air. Her wolf howled inside her chest, demanding she do something, anything. So she did the only thing she could think of. She let her shadows rise. The darkness came easily, too easily, after 3 years of suppression. It poured from her in waves, wrapping around them both, creating a cocoon of pure shadow that blocked out the light and the noise and everything except the two of them. In the darkness, her shadows weren't cold. They were warm, living. A second heartbeat that pulsed in rhythm with her own. She pressed that warmth into him, letting her shadows seep beneath his skin, fighting the ice with everything she had. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Caleb gasped. His body convulsed in her arms, his back arching. But it wasn't pain. It was release. She felt the ice retreat, felt his temperature begin to stabilize, felt the bond between them flare with sudden, shocking intensity. When his eyes opened, they were bright again. "Sibella," he breathed. "What did you—" "I don't know." Her voice shook. I couldn't let you. Your shadows." He stared at her with something like wonder. "They're warm. They push the curse back. The power everyone feared." She laughed, but it came out closer to a sob. "The power they tried to execute me for. It's the one thing keeping you alive. You saved me." He pulled her closer, pressing his forehead to hers. "Again. From the edge of death. With the very thing you've been taught to hate about yourself." They stayed like that as the ship pulled into harbor, wrapped in shadows, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. And somewhere deep inside her, Sibella felt something shift, a wall crumbling, a door opening, a truth she could no longer deny. She cared about him. Despite everything, she cared. The palace was exactly as Sibella remembered, cold, magnificent, and utterly unwelcoming. She walked through the great entrance hall with Caleb at her side, her hood pulled low to hide her face. The courtiers who had gathered to greet their returning king fell silent as they passed, their whispers following her like ghosts. "Is that her? The shadowborn? I heard she killed Prince Soren with her bare hands. Why would the king bring her back? Has he lost his mind?" Sibella kept her eyes forward, her jaw clenched. She'd expected this, had prepared herself for it. But the weight of their hatred was heavier than she remembered. Caleb's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a grip that was both protective and possessive. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll learn the truth soon enough." Her chambers were vast, decorated in shades of silver and deep blue, with a massive canopied bed dominating one wall. Windows looked out over the frozen mountains, their peaks glittering in the afternoon sun. Beautiful. And cold. So cold. "I've ordered fires lit," Caleb said, watching her face. "And extra blankets. The Dominion takes getting used to." "I never got used to it before." "You weren't here long enough." He paused at the connecting door. "Rest. The council will want to see you tomorrow, but tonight you're safe." But Sibella didn't rest. Over the following days, something shifted between them. Caleb visited her chambers each evening, ostensibly to discuss strategy, to plan their investigation into Soren's death. But the conversations grew longer, more personal. He told her about the burden of kingship, the loneliness of ruling a kingdom that feared him more than they loved him. She told him about her years in hiding, the quiet joys she'd found in baking bread and tending her garden. One night, she woke to find him shivering beside her despite the roaring fire. His skin was like ice against hers. She added more logs without being asked, built the fire up until the room was almost uncomfortably warm. It became a pattern. She'd wake in the night to tend the flames, to wrap herself around him when the curse crept closer. "You don't have to do this," he said one morning, his voice rough with sleep. I know. She pressed closer. I want to. Weeks passed. The investigation stalled, but something else grew in its place. Something neither of them named, but both of them felt. Sibella found herself seeking advice from the palace's oldest servant, a woman named Orindra, who had served 3 generations of Vexaris kings. How do I... She hesitated. How do I help him? Beyond the shadows, I mean. He's so alone, so cold, even when I'm warming him. Orindra studied her with ancient, knowing eyes. You warm his body, but what he needs is someone to warm his soul. That night, when Kalum came to her chambers, Sibella was bolder than she'd ever been. She kissed him first. His shock lasted only a moment before he responded, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close. The kiss was desperate, hungry, 3 years of suppressed longing finally given voice. They didn't complete the bond that night. The risk was too great, the curse too unpredictable. But they held each other until dawn, learning the geography of one another's bodies in the darkness. He returned every night after that. Sometimes they talked until the candles burned down to nothing. Sometimes they fell into each other without a word, communicating in touch and breath, and the desperate press of skin against skin. Sometimes she woke to find him watching her sleep, his expression so tender it made her chest ache. Why can't you love me? She wanted to ask. When you already treat me like you do? But she knew the answer. He couldn't love her because love would kill him. So she loved him in silence, and pretended that was enough. Until the night she couldn't pretend anymore. They lay tangled together, both breathing hard, the embers of the fire casting shadows across his face. Sibella traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips, memorizing the shape of him. I need to tell you something, she whispered. His arm tightened around her. What is it? I love you. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I know I shouldn't. I know what it means. But I love you, Kalum. I've loved you for weeks, and I can't keep pretending I don't. He went rigid in her arms, not with passion, with pain. Kalum? She pulled back. What's wrong? His hand flew to his chest, his face contorting. The curse. Something's... Then he collapsed. Not like before, not a gradual weakening. This was sudden, violent, final. His body hit the bed as frost exploded across his skin in jagged patterns, his eyes rolling back in his head. No. Sibella dropped over him, her shadows surging forward. No, 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 Kalum, stay with me, stay with me. But the frost kept spreading, and somewhere deep inside the bond, she felt the terrible truth she'd been running from all along. Her love was killing him, and there was nothing her shadows could do to stop it. The palace healers couldn't stop the frost. Sibella was pushed aside as they swarmed around Kalum's frozen body, their hands glowing with pale light as they tried to force warmth back into his veins. But she could see from their faces that it wasn't working. The ice was spreading too fast, consuming him from the inside out. What happened? Orindra turned to Sibella with accusation in her eyes. What did you do to him? Nothing. Sibella's voice broke. We were talking, and then he collapsed. You expect me to believe a shadowborn did nothing? Orindra's lip curled. Guards, restrain her. Touch her and you die. Meridia Valdron stood in the doorway, her dark eyes sweeping the room. Lady Valdron, this is a royal matter. I have exactly as much authority as the king granted me when he appointed me to investigate his brother's murder. Meridia stepped into the room, positioning herself between Sibella and the guards. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that this woman didn't cause his collapse. The curse did. Orindra's face paled. The curse? But that's just legend. It's very real. And it was designed specifically to kill any Vexaris who falls in love with someone of Vesrin Nighthollow's bloodline. Meridia's gaze fixed on Sibella. Which brings us to the part no one has told you yet. What do you mean? You're not just shadowborn, Sibella. Meridia's voice was gentle, almost kind. You're descended from Valdron herself, her direct heir. The curse was designed to activate when a Vexaris falls in love with someone of her blood. Your blood. The world tilted beneath Sibella's feet. That's impossible. My family has no connection. Your mother's bloodline. Valdron had a daughter before she died. That daughter was hidden, raised in secret, her lineage erased from all records. But the blood passed down, generation after generation, until it reached you. Sibella's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her mind reeling. She was descended from the woman who had cursed Caelim's family. The woman who had designed the very trap that was killing him now. The curse can only be broken by Valdron's blood, Meridia continued. Your blood. By willingly sacrificing your shadow power to sever the bond between bloodlines. But there's a problem. What? Someone doesn't want the curse broken. Meridia's expression darkened. Someone who's been manipulating events for years, ensuring that no shadowborn ever gets close enough to a Vexaris to attempt the breaking. Someone who killed Soren when he got too close to the truth. Before Meridia could say more, the chamber doors burst open. A man strode in, tall, silver-haired, with features that echoed Caelim's in colder, crueler lines. He wore the ceremonial robes of a Vexaris lord, and his eyes swept the room with possessive satisfaction. Well, he said, his voice smooth as poison. Isn't this a touching scene? The shadowborn weeping over the king she's killed? Sibella's wolf surged with instant visceral hatred. Lord Theron Vexaris, Meridia said flatly. Caelim's uncle. And, unless I'm very much mistaken, the man who murdered Prince Soren. Theron's smile didn't waver. What a vivid imagination you have, Lady Valdron, but I'm afraid you've got it backwards. His cold eyes fixed on Sibella. Guards, arrest this woman for the attempted murder of your king. On what grounds? Meridia demanded. Look at him. Theron gestured to Caelim's frozen body. Covered in ice, dying before our eyes, with her shadows still clinging to his skin. The evidence speaks for itself. The guards shifted uncertainly, looking between Theron and Meridia. You killed Soren, Sibella said, finding her voice at last. You framed me. You've been manipulating everything from the beginning. Careful, little shadowborn. Theron's smile turned sharp. Accusations without proof are dangerous things. I have proof. The voice was weak, barely audible, but it cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned. Caelim's eyes were open. Barely. His face was still covered in frost, his lips blue, but those pale eyes burned with fury as they fixed on his uncle. Nephew. Theron's composure flickered for just a moment. You should be dead. Sorry to disappoint. Caelim's hand found Sibella's, his frozen fingers closing around hers. Guards. Arrest Lord Theron. For treason. For the murder of my brother. For conspiracy against the crown. On what grounds? Theron's voice rose, losing its smooth polish. The ravings of a dying man? On the grounds that Soren left a journal. Caelim's lips curved in a terrible smile. Hidden where you couldn't find it. Documenting every meeting you had with your co-conspirators. Every plan you made. Every law you broke. Theron's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? Caelim's grip on Sibella's hand tightened. I found it the day before I left for Portugal. Why do you think I brought her back now? Why do you think I was willing to risk everything? You fool! Theron's composure shattered completely. You're going to die anyway. The curse is already killing you. She can't save you. No one can save you. I made sure of that. The confession hung in the air, damning and absolute. Guards, Caelim said quietly. Now. This time, the guards didn't hesitate. They moved on Theron with practiced efficiency, seizing his arms, forcing him to his knees. This isn't over. Theron screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "The curse can't be broken. You'll both die, and I'll find a way out of whatever cell you put me in, and I'll take everything that should have been mine from the beginning." Then he was gone, his curses echoing through the corridors. The moment he was gone, Caelim's strength gave out. His eyes rolled back, his body going limp, the frost spreading faster than before. "The journal," Meridia said urgently. "If Soren documented everything, there might be information about how to break the curse." "Where would it be?" "Soren's old chambers. They've been sealed since his death." Meridia was already moving toward the door. "Come, we don't have much time." Sibella pressed a desperate kiss to Caelim's frozen forehead. "Hold on," she whispered. "I'm going to save you. I swear it." Soren's chambers were exactly as he'd left them. Dust coated every surface. The bed was still made, the book still stacked on the desk, the curtain still drawn against a sun he would never see again. It felt like walking into a tomb. Sibella's shadows pushed into every corner, searching for hidden compartments, secret panels, anything that might conceal a journal. "He was clever," Meridia said, rifling through the desk drawers. "If he hid something, it won't be obvious." "How do you know so much about him?" Sibella asked. "About all of this?" Meridia's hand stilled. For a long moment she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough with old grief. "We were close once. Before politics made our union impossible. Before someone murdered him and blamed you for it." She looked up, and Sibella saw tears glistening in her dark eyes. "I was going to marry him, Sibella. We were going to find a way to break the curse together. He'd been researching it for years. And then he discovered something that scared him. Something about Theron, about the conspiracy. He was going to warn you that night. And Theron killed him for it. Theron killed the man I loved to protect a curse that never should have existed." Meridia's voice hardened. "So forgive me if I'm somewhat invested in seeing it destroyed." They searched in silence after that, tearing the room apart with increasing desperation. Sibella was about to give up when her shadows brushed against something beneath the floorboards. A hollow space, hidden, forgotten. "Here," she breathed. She dropped to her knees, her darkness seeping through the cracks in the wood. A moment later, a section of flooring lifted free, revealing a leather-bound journal covered in dust. Sibella's hands shook as she opened it. The first entries were mundane. Observations about court, notes on kingdom affairs. But as the pages progressed, the tone shifted, became darker, more paranoid. "Uncle Theron has been meeting with someone in secret. I followed him last night to the old catacombs beneath the palace. He didn't see me, but I heard enough. They're planning something. Something involving the shadowborn woman, the one Caelim is bonded to." Sibella kept reading, her heart pounding. "I've discovered the truth about the curse. It can be broken, but only by a direct descendant of Vesrin Nighthollow, willingly sacrificing their shadow power to sever the bond between bloodlines. The sacrifice must happen in the place where the curse was cast, the catacombs beneath the palace, where Vesrin's body still lies, preserved by her own magic. Sibella is that descendant. Theron knows this. He's planning to kill her before she can attempt the breaking. If she dies, the curse becomes permanent. No Vexaris will ever be able to love again, and Theron, with his ice magic bound to prevent the curse from affecting him, will be free to rule however he wishes." The entry ended abruptly, because the next day, Soren was dead. "He died trying to save me," Sibella whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Trying to warn me about Theron. Trying to tell me how to break the curse. And Theron killed him for it." Meridia's voice was cold with fury. "He murdered the man I loved to protect a secret that could have freed everyone. The journal says I can break the curse." Sibella looked up. "By sacrificing my power. By going to the catacombs where Vesrin is buried." "Sibella?" That sacrifice could kill you. Or it could save Kylam. Save everyone. She rose, the journal clutched to her chest. I have to try, Meridia. I have to. Then I'm coming with you? Meridia's grip closed around her arm. Soren died for this. For you. For the chance to end the curse. I won't let his sacrifice mean nothing. Together, they descended into the darkness beneath the palace. The catacombs were ancient. Carved into the bedrock beneath the palace, they stretched for miles in every direction, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that had existed long before the Vixari's family claimed the Northern Dominion. This was where the old magic lived, where Vesrin Nighthollow had cast her curse 200 years ago. Sibella felt it the moment she descended the first staircase, a resonance in her blood, a recognition that made her shadows sing with terrible familiarity. You're home, something whispered in her mind. You've finally come home. Do you feel that? Meridia's voice was hushed. The curse. Sibella pressed forward, following the pull in her chest. It knows I'm here. It's been waiting. They walked for what felt like hours, the tunnels growing older and more elaborate as they descended. Ancient carvings covered the walls, scenes of wolves and shadows, of love and war, of a woman with darkness pouring from her hands like water. Finally, they emerged into a vast circular chamber. At its center stood an altar of black stone, covered in symbols that still glowed faintly with residual magic. And chained to that altar, ancient symbols wrapped around her frozen form, was the preserved body of Vesrin Nighthollow herself. Sibella's breath caught. Her ancestor. The woman who had started all of this. Preserved by her own magic for 2 centuries, trapped between life and death, waiting for the descendant who could finally undo what she had done. She's still alive, Meridia whispered. Somehow. Her magic is still keeping her conscious. Sibella stepped closer, and Vesrin's eyes, dark as midnight, exactly like Sibella's own, followed her movement. Trapped in her own body, unable to rest until the curse is broken. Child. The voice echoed directly in Sibella's mind. You've come at last. I've been waiting so long. You did this. Sibella's voice shook with anger and grief. You cursed an entire bloodline because one of them wronged you. I did what was necessary. Vesrin's mental voice was weary beyond measure. They killed my sister. My innocent sister, whose only crime was loving the wrong man. I wanted them to suffer as I suffered. To know that love would always mean death for their kind. And now that suffering has destroyed countless lives, including the life of the man I love. Do you love him? Vesrin's ancient eyes searched Sibella's face. Truly. Despite everything his family has done to ours? Yes. The word came without hesitation. More than I knew was possible. More than I thought I was capable of, after everything that's happened. I love him. Something like sorrow flickered in Vesrin's frozen expression. Then you understand. You understand why I did what I did. And you understand what must happen now. The sacrifice. Your shadow power for his life. Your darkness for his survival. You will lose your shadows forever. The power that makes you what you are. But your wolf will remain. The bond will survive. And he will live. Sibella thought of her shadows. The darkness she'd feared and hated and hidden for so long. The power that made her a monster in everyone's eyes. The power that had saved Caelim's life on the ship. Could she give that up? Could she sacrifice the very thing that had saved him? The choice is yours, child. Vesrin's voice was fading, but choose quickly. Your mate has moments left, not hours. The curse is almost complete. Sibella closed her eyes. She thought of Caelim's face, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The way he'd held her in the darkness. His cold body slowly warming against hers. The way he'd said her name, like it was a prayer and a promise, and a plea all at once. She thought of the quiet life she'd wanted, the garden, the cottage, the peace, and she realized that none of it mattered without him. "I choose him," she said, opening her eyes. "I choose love. I choose to break the curse, whatever it costs me." She stepped forward and placed her hands on the altar, and let her shadows pour into the curse. The pain was indescribable. Sibella felt her shadows ripping away from her, not gently, not gradually, but in one violent, agonizing surge that left her screaming. 200 years of accumulated curse magic fought against her, tried to consume her, tried to drag her down into the same frozen prison that had held Valdron for centuries. But she held on. She thought of Caelim's smile, rare and precious and worth dying for. She thought of his hands, cold but gentle, cupping her face in the darkness. She thought of his voice saying her name, saying, "I love you," saying, "I would have searched for the rest of my life," and she pushed harder. The shadows burned as they left her. Every tendril of darkness, every whisper of power, every piece of the monster she'd thought she was. All of it poured into the altar, into the curse, into the breaking. Vestron's body began to crumble, centuries of preserved magic finally releasing its hold. "Thank you," the ancient witch whispered, her voice fading like morning mist. "Thank you for ending this, for freeing us all, for choosing love over power, forgiveness over revenge." Then she was dust, and Sibella was empty. She collapsed against the altar, gasping for breath. Her body felt hollow, scraped clean of everything that had made her different. The shadows were gone. She could feel their absence like a missing limb, like a hole in her soul. But deep inside her chest, her wolf stirred. Quieter now, no longer entwined with darkness, but still there, still hers. "Sibella." Meridia was at her side, pulling her upright. "Did it work? Are you—" "I don't know." Her voice was a rasp. "Caelim. We have to get to Caelim." They ran. Up through the catacombs, through the palace corridors, past guards who stared and servants who scattered. Sibella's legs screamed with exhaustion. Her lungs burned, her heart hammered against her ribs with desperate hope. "Please," she prayed, "please let it be enough. Please let him live." They burst into Caelim's chambers to find Arindra standing by the bed, her face wet with tears. Sibella's heart stopped. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." But then she saw him. Caelim was sitting up. His color had returned, warm gold replacing the deathly pallor. His eyes were bright and clear, the winter pale gray she remembered from before everything had gone wrong. The frost was gone. Every trace of it melted away, leaving only living, breathing, warm skin behind. "Sibella," he breathed. She crossed the room in 3 steps and threw herself into his arms. He caught her, pulled her close, and buried his face in her hair. His body was warm, genuinely warm, alpha hot the way it should always have been. The coldness that had lived in his bones for so long was finally, completely gone. "You're alive," she sobbed. "You're alive. You're alive. Because of you." His arms tightened around her. I felt it, the moment the curse broke, like ice shattering inside my chest, and then warmth, your warmth, flooding through the bond, filling every frozen part of me. "The bond is still there?" "Complete now. The way it should have been from the beginning." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes roaming over her features as if memorizing every detail. "You sacrificed your power for me. Your shadows. They're gone. But my wolf is still here." She pressed his hand to her chest over her racing heart. "I'm still me. Just less dark." "You were never dark." He cupped her face in his hands, warm hands now, gentle hands. You were always light, Sibella. You just couldn't see it. He kissed her then, deeply, thoroughly, with all the passion of a man who had been given a second chance at life. When they finally broke apart, they were both crying. I love you, he said. I can say it now. The curse is broken. For me, for our children, for every Vexaris who comes after us. I love you, Sibella. I've loved you since the moment I first heard your voice, and I will love you until the stars burn out. I love you too. She laughed through her tears. I loved you even when I was running, even when I was hiding, even when I told myself I hated you. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and the tip of her nose. I believe you asked me for something once. Something I refused. A quiet life. I was wrong to refuse you. His eyes softened. You deserve peace. You deserve everything you dreamed of in that cottage by the sea. I don't want the cottage anymore. She shook her head. I don't want quiet. I want you. Then have both. He took her hands, pressing them to his chest. Be my queen. Rule beside me. Help me build a kingdom where no one, shadowborn or otherwise, is ever condemned for what they are. And when the work is done, when the kingdom is healed and the treaties are signed and Theron is rotting in the cell he deserves. He lifted her hand to his lips. We'll find our quiet. Together. I promise. Sibella laughed through her tears. Is that a proposal? It's a promise. He pulled her close again. The first of many. 1 year later. The garden was smaller than the one in Caldera, but Sibella loved it more. It sprawled behind the royal chambers, a private sanctuary she'd designed herself. Lavender and rosemary grew in neat rows. Tomatoes climbed wooden stakes. And in the center, surrounded by winter roses that bloomed despite the cold, stood a fig tree. It had finally borne fruit. Someone's been busy. Calem's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Is this what you do while I suffer through council meetings? This is what I do to stay sane. She leaned back against his warm chest. How did it go? Theron's trial concluded today. Life imprisonment in the deepest cell we have, stripped of all titles and magic. His voice hardened briefly. He'll never hurt anyone again. And Meridia? Officially appointed as ambassador to the Valdron territories. She asked about you, said to tell you that Soren would be proud. Sibella's throat tightened. I hope so. He died trying to save me. And you honored his sacrifice by saving everyone else. Calem turned her in his arms, cupping her face. The curse is broken. The kingdom is healing. Young Shadowborn are being welcomed instead of feared. That's because of you. It's because of us. He smiled. That rare, precious smile that still made her heart skip. I suppose it is. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. A year ago, Sibella had been hiding in a village, convinced she would never feel safe again. Now she stood in the arms of a king who loved her, surrounded by a life she'd never dared to dream of. You know, Calem said thoughtfully, you never told me what you were thinking that day I showed up at your cottage. I was thinking that you'd ruined everything. She smiled. That my quiet life was over. And now? She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face, the face of the man who had chased her across 3 continents, the man who had loved her enough to die for her. The man who had given her everything she'd ever wanted, and so much more. Now I'm thinking that quiet is overrated. She rose on her toes to kiss him. And that you're exactly where you belong. His smile lit up his entire face. Always. He murmured against her lips. I belong with you. Always. She asked for a quiet life. He tracked her across 3 continents to say no. And in the end, he gave her something better. A love so loud it echoed across eternity. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. I always read them. and they mean more than you know.